So everyone, just want to introduce myself, me, and then we'll talk about the procedure for asking questions. So as Deborah said, my name is Megan Ropsky. I am a clinical behavior resident at the Animal Behavior Wellness Center. And at least as far as that goes, basically I'm doing a non-conforming residency. So I don't have a school that I'm associated with. I have a mentor. Her name is Dr. Amy Pike, and I basically go ahead and see cases under her guidance, and once I reach the number of cases that I'm able to sit for my board exam, along with some other things that I have to complete as well. So a little bit more about me. I graduated from Ohio State in 2014. I did my small animal medicine and surgery rotating internship at Friendship Hospital for Animals in DC. I spent about 4 years there after my internship, just working in the surgery department as a surgical associate. And as I was doing that, I started to realize how much more I could help my clients and their pets as well, going through a behavior residency and just seeing what more I could do for everyone, for the community at large. And so here we are. So I started my residency back in August of 2019, and the ultimate goal is to sit for my board exam in October of 2023. So let me go ahead and at least share my, at least get my PowerPoint going that way. Let's see. So there we go. So you guys should be able to see that screen. Let's see. So there we go. So you guys should be able to see that screen. Perfect. We should be playing again. So hopefully it stays up there so you guys can keep seeing everything. So when we talk about aggression, the way that we as behaviorists define aggression is that can be any distance increasing behavior. So it's not necessarily just a bark, a growl. It can be anything that causes an increase in distance from that dog or cat. We're talking about dogs today, and that trigger or that stimulus. And I did want to go ahead and define familiar and unfamiliar people. So unfamiliar people are strangers or people that are not in the house on a daily basis. So that can be relatives, friends, that can be people coming over for dinner, things like that. When we define familiar people, that is people that dog interacts with on a daily basis. So someone that is living in the home, if we are having dog walkers come in on a daily basis, there's the potential that we can include dog walkers on that familiar people as well. And whenever we think about what a response is based on, we have to think about a couple of different categories. So responses can certainly be based on previous learning experiences. They can be based on traumatic experiences. They're very much concerned with early socialization. So remember, for dogs, that socialization period is from about 3 to 12 weeks. That's when that puppy is learning what things are okay in the environment, what things are not scary, and if there are things that they are not exposed to, that can be something that can cause traumatic experiences in the future or can cause some things to be scary. The other thing we have to think about is genetics and ontogeny, which is a developmental aspect, can certainly base what these reactions might be. Previous training is a big component. This can be our positive-based training, but it can also include compulsion training. And then these last three are very important to consider. So medical components, discomfort, and exhaustion. So if we have a dog that has a medical problem, that can cause them to be a bit more irritable, can decrease that threshold for tolerance of various stimuli. Same thing for discomfort. If you have a dog that is a bit uncomfortable, say it has a torn ligament, or say its back hurts, or even if it has any sort of gut discomfort, maybe it feels a little bit nauseous, maybe it doesn't feel itself, those can all certainly alter that baseline, bring that baseline closer to a threshold, and then say have a reaction. We also have to remember that dogs communicate through body language and posture. So dogs have these ritualistic behaviors that work to de-escalate threats and to avoid conflict. Dogs display these behaviors with the major understanding that the recipient of those behaviors is going to understand and respond appropriately. The concern or the challenge is when that recipient does not. And that recipient can be a dog, it can be a person. It's all about displaying that behavior and expecting that recipient to respond in kind. And so we've all heard these. You've got that person who says, I am great with dogs, or all dogs love me, or they'll like me, or when you're talking about other dogs, my dog loves other dogs. Or you have that person who just walks up and pets a dog without asking. Notice how none of these statements take into account how that dog is feeling, how that owner feels, or gives any respect to what's happening in that current situation. So a lot of times we have to think about what that owner is going through, what that dog is going through, or if we're the person on the other end of the leash, gosh, what are we feeling in that situation? So just want to give you guys a couple of examples to at least get us in the mindset of a reactive dog. So this is what we might see when we're out walking our dog on a leash. This is what we see, this cute, fluffy little dog approaching us. A reactive dog is going to see something more scary. They're going to see a more threatening stimulus. So a good example is this lion. Another example, you've got this lovely gentleman. He's walking down the street. He looks pretty friendly. This is what we see. A reactive dog might see this. They are going to be concerned about this person walking down the street. One more example for you guys. So adorable children running, playing soccer. This is what we might see. A reactive dog who's nervous around children might see this. It could also be what I see. So we'll all move on from there. A dog's response to a trigger is their own. Remember, that's based on previous experiences, learning, and the context of that situation. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is dog responses to various triggers fall along the ladder of aggression. Remember, we defined aggression as any distance increasing behavior. And so since we have that ladder of aggression, let's at least look through this image that we've got here. So if you guys look at the lower rungs of the ladder in the green and yellow area, those aren't these more assertive forms of aggression that we might think of. We've got blinking, yawning, licking of the nose, turning your head away, or actually turning your body away. So we might not necessarily think of those as blatant signs of aggression, but they are on those lower rungs. That's that dog telling us, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with this situation. I'm trying to tell you that and trying to ask for that distance. When we get higher on that ladder of aggression in the yellow to yellow-orange area, we've got walking away, pinning their ears back, tucking their tail, or the quintessential lying down with that leg up. All of those are escalations on that ladder of aggression before we get to that point where we are trying to make contact. Once we get more towards that red area, we've got stiffening and staring, and then growling, snapping, and biting. So I feel like a lot of times we think about aggression as more of those signs that we're seeing in that more red area, but we have to think that there are these lower level signs that can certainly happen. And if we are a bit more respectful of those lower level signs, we might not push that dog to get to those higher level signs. This is a figure that I really like because it helps to at least give us ideas of what the more subtle signs of fear and anxiety can be. So some of these we've already talked about on that ladder of aggression. So we've looked at licking of the lips. Again, when there's not food nearby, that dog shouldn't necessarily be licking their lips. We can see panting when it's not hot outside or when they're not thirsty. Other things that we can see when we look at their facial expression is going to be furrowed brows or ears to the side. Some dogs might even start to move in slow motion or freeze when they're confronted with a triggering stimulus. Other dogs might only show yawning. So when a dog is yawning at a time that they shouldn't be tired, that's a sign that they're uncomfortable with that situation. Other dogs might go to the other extreme, from the moving in slow motion to being a bit more hypervigilant. So that's that dog that is looking in all directions, trying to see if there's something that they should be worried about. It might also involve pacing or moving away. I do want you guys to at least look at that bottom left. So we look at dogs that suddenly won't eat. So if they were eating, and now suddenly they are not eating, the way that I think about that is eating is a sign that I am comfortable with the situation. So if I'm eating, I'm comfortable enough to engage in that luxury item, food or a treat. And if I don't feel comfortable and I stop eating, that should be a sign to my person that says, I'm not comfortable, we need to do something different. So now let's talk about different reactions that we can see. So very commonly, we can see these reactions based in fear. So fear-based reactions are going to be a more defensive aggression. The main intent there is to put distance between you and a threat. We can see a fearful body posture. We can see increased heart rate and breathing rate. And remember, anxiety can be about a certain situation, people, or things, but it can also be something more general. And so if we think again, where do these fearful responses come from? We talked a bit about traumatic experiences. This can be pain, this can be illness. Can we see inadequate socialization causing a more fearful response? Can certainly be affected by mom's health, diet, and behavior, other genetic factors. Confrontational training methods or punishment can cause a fearful response, and again, those medical conditions increasing irritability and lowering thresholds. Doesn't necessarily have to be every single one of those, but we can certainly see some major components that might add to a more fearful response. So this is one of the more common questions that I get as a behaviorist. So my dog's body posture has changed over time. Why might that happen? So body postures certainly change with experience. Initially, a fearful or submissive body posture might be seen, but might change to a more aggressive or assertive response as that dog learns that aggressive responses are effective in warding off a threat. So as that dog goes through that learning process, they start to learn, oh, well, when I did this, when I growled, when I lunged, when I barked, we can certainly see that they can have more of that aggressive reaction as they start to learn that, well, that worked. I wanted that threat to go away. Now it's gone. The intensity can increase over time as well. Another question I commonly get is, well, gosh, we don't see those early warning signals anymore. What happened? Usually I think about this in one of two ways. So dogs that learn that a lower level signal is not effective might escalate those signals to one that is. So example, if I'm a dog, I yawn and I turned away and that person still approached me. Clearly my yawn, my turning away, those lower level signs on that ladder of aggression was not effective. This time I'm going to growl and make sure they get the message. The other thing that I think about is dogs that are punished for those lower level signals are less likely to use them because they're concerned about receiving additional punishment. They're going to escalate to a signal that was not punished. Nobody wants to be punished, so they're going to do something that works and doesn't lead to that punishment. So another example, putting myself in the dog's shoes. I'm uncomfortable around children. I growled at that child who tried to pet me, and then I got yelled at myself. Clearly that means I shouldn't growl. This time I'm going to snap when they get too close so they get the message. In that dog's mind, it's very much, I'm not going to do something that's gotten me punished in the past, so I need to do something different. I need to escalate to something that can work. When we look at fear-based reactions, again, they can be directed to anything that causes a heightened anxiety response in that dog. So when I think about that from a behaviorist standpoint, all unfamiliar people, all dogs, all children, but it can also be something that is more specific. So it can be due to race, gender, certain facial features. I have some dogs that are fearful of men with facial hair, people wearing sunglasses. So it can very much be what they are wearing, what they're holding. If we're thinking about dogs, that can certainly be breed. It can also be proximity. So all of these things we need to think about and at least keep that in mind. What we're going to do is we're going to go through at least those more specific diagnoses that I would use and think about them as far as context and what we're seeing in that regard. So Fear-based aggression to familiar people. Remember, this is a member of the household or someone that they interact with on a daily basis. Reactions can range from stiffening, staring, barking, growling, snarling, snapping, and biting. So remember, we've got that wide range of reactions. Very commonly, the context that we see these reactions includes being approached or reached for. This can be in the presence of a particular resource, but doesn't necessarily have to be. This can be during interactions or even when they're being reprimanded. The most common cause is going to be this internal conflict based on the dog's perception of the human as a threat. So let's look into that context a little bit more. So what do we mean by conflict? So conflict can be over an item, a space, or with physical interactions. It most commonly occurs when the human's behavior is contrary to what the dog expects, especially if the dog has postured to diffuse the tension. Repeated encounters with humans that have unsuccessful attempts to communicate, that dog is probably going to escalate and that human's going to respond in kind. If we look at this fear-based aggression to unfamiliar people, so remember, that's going to be directed at people that are not well known to the dog, can certainly be a normal response to a perceived threat, can be secondary to that inadequate socialization, a traumatic event, or punishment. Pretty commonly, we can see a learned or reinforced component. We're going to look at that once we get further into the example, but just to give you guys a taste, we can see that if, say, the dog is concerned about other people approaching, that owner is very much learning in this situation as well, saying, well, gosh, if my dog reacts to other people, I need to be more on guard as well. Might we see a tightening of a leash? Might we find that they are stressed in that regard, and that dog learns from these interactions, learns from that reinforcement, and might respond in kind. We can also certainly see that dogs that are encouraged to territorially bark or perform this watchdog behavior can have a bit of a challenge to turn that on and off. So if they've been rewarded in the past for barking at strangers approaching, barking at people approaching the house, it can be very challenging for them to say, okay, in this specific situation, I'm allowed to bark, but in other situations, I'm not allowed to bark. So that's something that can be challenging for these dogs as well. When we think about specifics, again, we can see more general characteristics or more specific characteristics. It can initially involve those escape attempts. Then we can see, again, that turning to this more assertive threat. When we think about territorial aggression, we can see that it's associated with the home, a yard. Sometimes it can happen when a dog is in a car or even with certain locations within the home. The other thing to think about is it can also extend to a certain proximity around the house. I actually have one client whose dog has about a 2-block radius around the house. And the second they get past that 2-block radius, dog is good to go and there aren't those substantial reactions. So again, it's all about what this dog perceives as territory when we're talking about territorial aggression specifically. Aggression can certainly be affected by the location, proximity of the person, the speed of approach, and whether an escape route is possible. We're going to touch on unfamiliar dogs because quite commonly this happens when we are out on a leash. Could involve that human that is present with that dog or could be a reaction to that dog on their own. So remember, this is a behavior that's directed to dogs that are outside of that aggressive dog's social group. It can certainly be an immediate reaction upon seeing that dog. It can also be something that happens after sniffing, play, or other interactions. That underlying motivation is going to be fear and anxiety. Victims of previous attacks might certainly be predisposed. When we think about when these signs might happen, they're going to be more common actually at 2 age points. And so puberty, that 6 to 9 month time period, or at social maturity, so 18 to 36 months. These are the most common times that my clients present to me because those dogs are showing those changes. And then we think about what is that dog's response to a potential threat. So again, we've got a couple different categories. We've got that more aggressive behavior, so higher on that ladder of aggression, that growling, that lip lifting, barking, snapping, lunging, and biting. Again, we can see that more submissive or fearful posture, crouching, backing away, ears flattened, tail tucked, licking of the lips, and even looking away. And then you have potentially that more assertive posture, that standing upright, moving forward, ears forward and tail up. That dog is saying, I'm going to make myself big and bold so that I look a bit more assertive, a bit more threatening if I need to ward off a potential issue. The other thing I think about as a component of these is excitement or arousal. So I think of these as our lovable dogs underneath, but maybe they're making poor choices. They can be overexcited, over-aroused, maybe they're frustrated, worried, scared, or anxious. With all of those, we can see that there can be a continuum of emotion. So dogs have a bit of a challenge in that anything that is emotionally overstimulating or over arousing, they can go from different types of emotions very quickly. They can move from being very excited to, oh my gosh, you got too close and now I'm worried, in the span of an instant. So that can be a bit of a challenge when we have that dog that is a bit more excitable and might put itself in a bit of a challenging situation. So I wanted to give you guys a visual so that we can start to think about what this arousal means. So we're going to talk about an arousal bucket. Think of arousal as positive and negative stress or stimuli or trigger. The rim of your bucket is your threshold for this stress. Once you overfill that bucket and go over threshold, you cannot possibly handle another stressor. So any stressor following that overflow can cause a reaction. So that can be whether it's a big stressor or a small one. Emptying that bucket and getting back to baseline can take time. It's not necessarily as easy as just dumping that arousal bucket and starting over. So here's your visual. So when we think about that arousal bucket, we're going to look from the bottom and go through the top of this visual here. So that first line is going to be a typical day. So that can be anything that this dog experiences on a daily basis. Okay, we're going to go out on a walk. A person passed me on a bike while we were out on a walk. I really don't like bikes, but I still have some space in my arousal bucket, so I'm able to handle it. Okay, I've got a play date with my friends in the yard. This is a positive thing that we're doing, some positive arousal. This is great, I'm really liking it. But again, those emotions are filling up that arousal bucket. We come home, we have dinner, and I'm sitting watching by my front window because you know what? It's 5 o'clock, all those kids are coming home from school, all those people are driving by in their cars, everyone else is walking their dogs, and OMG, if somebody passes by that window one more time, I'm gonna have a reaction. So we can see how that dog's arousal bucket fills up throughout the day. And again, I would think about when we are relieving that arousal, again, it's not just as simple as dumping that bucket out. Imagine a little spigot on the bottom of that bucket and slowly opening that spigot and allowing that arousal to dissipate. So we have some dogs that if their arousal bucket fills up during one day, they might not fully eliminate that arousal from one day to the next. So if they are experiencing multiple stressors, their arousal bucket might be half filled the next day. So that's something we need to keep in mind as well. When we talk about reactivity on leash, it's challenging in the behavior world because we don't necessarily have a diagnosis for this. It comes more from the trainers that we'll work with, and we at least try to tease out what that response is and where it's coming from. And we can certainly see that responses can be more intense on a leash because of this perception of the inability to flee. So if we think about our fight or flight response, if we take away that flight option, we might be more likely to see that fight response. And again, we can see that change from defensive to offensive as they start to learn what works. If we start to look at leash reactivity in general, we think about contributing risk factors. So multiple stimuli can certainly fill up that bucket more easily. we can see that proximity to a stimuli is something that can make that reaction a bit worse. Previous punishment for reactions on leash, unclear expectations. If that dog does not know what we are asking them to do, that can be a bit of a challenge. Remember, adding to that frustration of, oh gosh, I don't know what I should be doing. Previous traumatic events and lack of early and appropriate socialization. I did want to touch on one additional component before I take a look at the chat and start to look at some questions that have come through. But if we talk about predatory behavior, I get a lot of questions as far as, well, can my dog's reaction be a predatory aggression? It's something that we don't see as commonly, but it is very much a let's tease out what that behavior looks like. So predatory behavior is a sequence of behaviors that are associated with the catching and killing of another animal for consumption. That's the goal. This is a behavior that is hardwired and linked to basic survival in that dog's mind. We can see that the emotional effect is different from other forms of aggression. So there's less emotions in this predatory behavior or predatory aggression. It's basically a means of survival, so less of those emotions. The predatory sequence itself involves a couple of different motions. So stalking, crouching, stealthy movements, and that visual focus. Then we can see chasing, catching and pouncing, biting, killing, and then that eventual consumption. When we think about predatory targets, targets are usually quick moving or targets with high pitched vocalization. So that can be small animals, cats, infants, and wildlife. The big key here is we're going to see that lack of preliminary threat. So that dog is trying to be as stealthy as possible to have that behavior occur. We're not necessarily going to see all of that additional posturing that we might see with another reaction. Contributing risk factors to seeing this predatory behavior is going to be a potential genetic predisposition. So think about your border collie. They very much have that stalking and visual focus and staring component of that predatory sequence. Early experience of predatory behavior, so learning and positive reinforcement can all be major components. This is a very rewarding behavior for a dog. It provides physical and mental stimulation. Dogs with increased reactivity might be more likely to give chase and have this predatory sequence occur. The other differentials that we can think of is any attention-seeking behavior. If I've been rewarded for my predatory sequence in the past, I'm going to be more likely to do it again. We can also see that play can be a potential other diagnosis that we think of and other forms of aggression. This is why it's so important to tease out exactly what we're seeing in those behaviors. So this is our first chat and question break. I'm going to take a sip of my tea so that I can keep my voice, and then I'm going to start looking through the chat. I'm going to start at the very beginning and get to the questions that we have there. Let me see. Boop, 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 boop. Gosh, now I'm going through you guys alerting us to potentially sharing the wrong screen. So I love that you guys alerted to that. Let's see. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Let me go. I'm trying to get to that first question because it looks like people are sending us some questions, and when they do, it pops down to the bottom here. So let's see, this first one that I've got is from, so I've got Amy Fagan asked a question. Her question was, it was more of a, let's define what that dog looks like when they are lying on their back with that leg up. And so I think that's very much in the context of what is happening there. So when we find that a dog is lying on its back with that leg up, if it is something that is initiated by the dog, so if they are very wiggly, if they have very soft body postures and things like that, we can certainly see that that is an appropriate response. That is more of an invitation that, yes, I am comfortable with I'm comfortable with this interaction. If we find that that is initiated by humans approaching, then I get a bit more concerned about what is that dog trying to tell us. So very much in those ritualistic displays as far as what is that dog trying to tell us. When we look at behaviors of, say, wolves and other dogs as well, we can certainly see that that flipping up on the back with that paw up can be a please, let's de-escalate the threat, let's tone down that interaction. So it very much depends on, yes, context, and also what that dog is showing us and who initiated that interaction. So that can be certainly something that is a challenge, but it's very much in that context. If that dog is very wiggly and has that soft body posture, that's where I can definitely say that that is something that is an initiation of a, yes, I'm okay with this interaction. Let's see. Going back up. Okay. Let's see. Yep, Amy said again that she has discovered that their dog is not very comfortable with hands or people reaching towards their dog, and so they've actually put a note up and have very much advocated for that to happen. So that's certainly something that we can see is helpful, very much so, advocating for your dog and saying, hey, that's not something that they are comfortable with. And again, very much context is key. Let's see. Kelsey said, I'm having a hard time telling if my dog is fearful or really excited about seeing other dogs. She has a more assertive body language, but without the barking. And so what I would say, again, that's going to be body language is going to be key. And your dog might have a reaction to a certain dog in a certain situation, but might react differently in other situations. So what I think about is if that dog is concerned about an interaction, we're going to have more of a stiffened body posture, tightened muscles, ears might be back a little bit, more tensing of that face, whereas an excited dog should be a bit more wiggly. The challenge is going to be if you have a little bit of that in between. What I would always say is err on the side of caution. If your dog does not have that great wiggly, soft body language and has a good interaction with that dog in the past, I would say, well, gosh, I don't necessarily know if I want my dog to interact there. Jen asked, do our dogs feel our emotions, and could that add to their response? It's certainly a possibility. We have that challenge of we can't necessarily ask our dogs, gosh, what are you feeling here? Do you know that I'm a bit anxious? But we can certainly see that if we as their owners are a bit more anxious and stressed about that situation, if they're looking to us for cues, certainly our own stress and anxiety could potentially add to the stress and anxiety associated with that situation. Let's see, we've got a question. So we're at the arousal bucket portion. So we've got a question that, would homecoming fill that bucket instantly and then going for a walk overflow that bucket? It could certainly be a possibility. So remember, that bucket is going to be filled by any positive or negative emotional response. So if people coming home is, oh my gosh, the most amazing thing, if that almost instantly fills that bucket, certainly a reaction to another person or dog on a walk could overflow that bucket. So we do have to be a bit mindful of that. And maybe it's a matter of taking some time in between. Maybe that first walk is just a quick potty, and then we come back in if that dog is going to be more predisposed to having that bucket overflow on a walk. Let's see. Elizabeth asked, how do you fix inadequate socialization? Sounds like she didn't get her dog until he was about 2 years old, and it's been really hard to break his way of thinking. That can certainly be a challenge when we can't go ahead and turn back that clock and show them that things are not scary. I've got a rescue dog myself, so I definitely understand how that can be a challenge. What I would say is that's where we work to change that emotional response to the things that they might find a bit scary, a bit more concerning. So I try to find something that is a super delicious food item that we can say, hey, when you see that scary thing, here's a Vienna sausage, here is a hot dog, here is cheese. Creating and changing that positive emotional response can be helpful to turn their thinking as far as, well, before I thought that dog was a scary thing and I needed to be worried. Now seeing that dog means I get awesome treats. Okay, I can better handle that interaction. Let's see, let me go back. Let's see, it sounds like, so we've got another question that is another rescue dog that will actually go ahead and attack their partner in the home. How can we change this? What I would say is, Carrie, shoot me a private message so that I can at least talk to you guys at the end so that we can at least tease some of those things out and maybe see what's going to be the best direction there. Sarah asked, if our dog is always on a leash for walks, but other dogs in our community are off leash, how can we help our dog to manage the many times that a dog approaches them quickly and sometimes suddenly? And that's a big question that I get pretty commonly from my clients. You know, I'm trying to be an appropriate owner and have my dog on a leash, and there are other dogs that are coming towards me. And what I would say is that's where I would employ an emergency U-turn. That's where I would say, okay, if I've got my dog on a leash, let me go and remove my dog from that situation as fast as I possibly can. And then it might even be a matter of, do we find a better walking route so that we don't at least encounter those dogs, or those dogs that might be a bit more likely to approach that dog on a leash. That's what I would at least think about. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, we've got another one from, so we got one from Emma. Let's see. Oh gosh, and someone just added one more. Let me go back there, and then probably what I'll do is, since we spent some time on questions, I'll probably take a pause for questions and go back. So let me work on Emma's question here, and then we'll at least keep going through that PowerPoint so that we can get through some of the next sections as far as management goes. So Emma's question is, my dog jumps on and growls at strangers when they move in our apartment, but she will then back off and jump on and off again. She wags her tail the whole time. Is this a nervous behavior? How do we correct it? So this is a super important question, because I find very much that tail wagging can be a bit of a misnomer. So tail wagging can be something that is excitement. It can be something that is nervous. It can be that more assertive dog. So tails can definitely be a bit of a challenge. So what I would say is, Emma, hold that question until we get further into the PowerPoint. I've got a great example for you that will actually go about working through a dog that has a more of a challenging reaction to strangers. So I know you guys have a ton of questions, so let me keep going with that PowerPoint, and then let's let some of those questions build up. And if they are a bit more specific, shoot me that private message. They come up separately on the screen so that we're at least able to go through and maybe answer some of those more private questions there. So let me keep going. So now that we know what we're dealing with, what can we do to help? So I think the big thing is going to be, remember, your reactive dog is not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. So what can we do to help them when they are having a challenge? So the things that we can think about: medication, management, and training alternate behaviors. So there are definitely multiple components to this strategy. I don't like to say that the answer is always medication, because certainly it's not just a matter of saying, here is a medication. We certainly want to use management and alternative training and behavior modification to help these dogs that are having this difficulty. So if we think about medication, as far as these reactions being rooted in underlying anxiety, certainly anti-anxiety medications can be used. Daily medication can be used to improve the baseline overall. We can also think about situational medications for these more stressful times. The goal in using a medication is going to be to decrease the frequency, intensity of reactions, and then to improve that recovery time. The targeted neurotransmitters that we're going to try to alter and to change brain chemistry are going to be serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and GABA. Since we want to at least talk more about these general management options, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail as far as what medications we can use, when we can use them, but think about that as a potential option as far as, can I help these dogs that have these reactions that are based in anxiety and fear? When we talk about management, so the main goals of management are going to be to decrease access to a trigger. We want to increase the distance from a trigger. We want to be able to remove that dog from a stressful situation. We certainly want to advocate for your dog. So that again speaks to those dogs that are approaching your dog off leash. Maybe that's where we have that conversation with that owner and say, hey, this is something that can be a bit stressful. Ultimately, the goal of management is to prevent that behavior itself from happening. When we think about training and bringing training and behavior modification into this management strategy, this treatment plan, we think about training in 3 separate phases. So the goal first is to decrease the overall stress and anxiety. We want to go about learning that new behavior in a stress-free situation. We then can apply that behavior to a more stressful situation with slightly increasing difficulty. So the greatest example that I have from one of my trainers is when we think about stressful situations versus not stressful situations. If you are drowning and I ask you to do long division without a pen and paper, the last thing that you're going to be able to do is to do that long division. You're going to be more concerned about drowning. So that's that stressful situation. Certainly, you know how to do long division. We've all done it. But if you're drowning, you can't necessarily use that logic part of your brain. So again, it's making sure that we are working through these things and bringing ourselves up to that point where we can use that behavior that we know in a more stressful situation. So what we're going to look at next is a couple of examples, and we're going to go through what that dog feels in these stressful situations, how their human might respond to their reaction, what we can do to at least manage these reactions, so what we might think of as our treatment plan, what might be some pitfalls that we need to think about, and what we can do even better yet. So these are just a couple of examples, but there are certainly some things that we can apply to multiple different situations. So first off, let's look at an example of a fear-based reaction to a familiar person. So we're thinking about ourselves in the context of that dog. We're sitting on the couch, your human approaches and makes some gesture to get off of the couch. Well, this couch is super comfy. No, thank you, I will not be moving. They gesture again and then reach for you. Whoa, that is not what you signed up for. You tell them with a growl or an air snap that I don't really feel like moving from this couch. So if we look at this dog in this picture, he, she, it. This dog is sitting on a couch. Look at those ears. They look a little bit pulled back. We can see a little bit of the whites of that dog's eye. Might be a bit wary of our approach as a human. So what's going to be that human's response? Let's think about that. That human might yell. They might be a bit angry. You're my dog. Why would you try to bite me? They might be a little bit sad. Again, you're my dog. Why would you try to bite me? They might try to move them physically. So this is my couch. I'm going to move you. I want to sit here. Or they might walk away to not escalate the situation. But we need to stop. Did we consider the context of that dog's response? Do they actually know another behavior? Has there been a difficult interaction in the past that they learned from and they're drawing on? So let's think about these things from a management, medication, and alternative behavior standpoint. So is this dog anxious and fearful, and could we improve its baseline with medication? Does this dog have a reason to be fearful of a person's approach? Do some people let them stay on the couch and others not? So think of that from a consistency and predictability standpoint. Does it have an alternative place to sleep that's also comfy? Does it actually know that alternative behavior? So what I did is I said, let's review. So let's look at those questions and let's think of some potential answers and way we can work through this. So if that dog is anxious and fearful, could they possibly benefit from medications? Certainly, it's always something that we can think about. If they are generally anxious or anxious in other contexts, we can certainly consider it. If this dog's primary problem is, nah, I'm not moving off of the couch, then that can be a bit of a, I don't know if I really need to think about medication. So again, it's all about that context and that history. Does this dog have a reason to be fearful of a person's approach? So we think about previous history with that owner. Are there histories of aversive techniques? Have we had problems moving this dog from the couch in the past? When we think about these different rules for different people, this can be a challenge for dogs. Again, think about that consistency and predictability. If we want that dog to be able to move away from that couch, we need to make sure that everybody is on the same page and that dog knows what's expected of it. So does it have an alternate place to sleep that is also comfy? A dog bed, a blanket, some other part that's super comfy for them to spend some time on. Does it know an alternate behavior? I think this is going to be the biggest challenge because we very much as humans think, okay, well, if I ask you for X behavior at any point, you should know what it is. But if that dog does not know that alternate behavior, that gesture from that human, how does that dog know what's expected of it? So things that we can think about are a cue for off, go to your bed, go get a toy. How can we physically move this dog without actually touching them? So let's think about some pitfalls. Again, if they don't know that alternate behavior, how can we ask for it? Setting appropriate expectations are very much helpful for these dogs. If they're concerned about humans approaching, do they feel the need to protect themselves and their space even more? If humans approaching is not fun more often than not, why should I want them to approach? So again, that's thinking about how do we change that emotional response and how do we have that dog be a bit more comfortable with this interaction. So let's think about what we can do even better yet. So can we certainly explore that medication option? If it's appropriate, yes. And this is my little soapbox. We're not using medication in a vacuum. So we certainly want to be able to work through that management technique and those behavior modification and training sessions. We talked a bit about that consistency and predictability of all household members. So if that dog knows exactly what's expected of it, we can certainly have a better response. We want to manage by decreasing the number of approaches and reaches so that dog does not continue to practice that behavior. If we provide them with an alternate location to lay, we want to reward them for being in that alternate location and then work to cue that movement on their own. So working through training of a go to bed cue or go get a toy cue. So if they're going to get a toy, they can't be on the couch, or we can certainly ask them to jump off of that couch. And then we can start to work on conditioning that positive emotional response to people approaching if that is a component of their concern. Again, let's think about that term conflict and that conflict aggression. Thinking, I want my dog to do X, but they have a different idea. This conflict can lead to aggression. So we as the human are escalating that behavior. We might not be responding to postures appropriately, and so that dog feels a bit threatened and they might respond. More of my common examples as far as this conflict aggression, I can see this more commonly with brushing, grooming, getting dressed, so putting collars on, harnesses on, jackets, booties, what have you. Nail trims, and baths. So remember, it's all in the context of what these dogs are comfortable with. So now that we are on the topic of familiar people, let's talk about kids. So in the mind of an animal, children can be loud, they can be unpredictable, they might cause discomfort. So is there hitting, grabbing of ears, tails, hair, if they're not petting gently? Sometimes it can be something as simple as a child has fallen on a dog in the past and they remember that experience. It's a bit of a challenge to ease into a child introduction. They sort of just appear. So if you've got a family, a couple that is pregnant, there's going to be a day when that kid just comes home, and that can be a bit of a challenge for that dog. Also, kids come with a lot of stuff and people, and this can certainly be overwhelming. So if that dog, maybe it's not necessarily directed at the child, but if that dog is concerned about people coming in and out of its house very frequently, we can certainly see that that can be something that is indeed stressful and overwhelming for that dog. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some images of dogs interacting with kids. If you guys came to my talk on dominance, you'll recognize the picture of the golden retriever with a child in the blue striped shirt. But we're going to go through each one of these and look at what that dog is doing and what their reaction is. So if we look at that top photo with the little lab mix and the the child with the blue and white striped dress. So let's look at that image first. So the one thing that I will say is certainly good about this is we've got 2 adults there. So we've got adult supervision. That's amazing. We've got 1 adult for the child and 1 adult for the dog. But look at that dog's reaction to that child reaching for it. Those ears are not upright, they're not wiggly, they are very much pinned next to that dog's neck. We can see that those lips are a bit tense. So look at the end of those lips. Those aren't those soft lips that you could sort of smoosh. Those are little concerned lips. And you can also see that that dog isn't coming up to that child's hand. It's sort of leaning down and away from that hand. So those can be signs that that dog is a bit uncomfortable with that situation. If we look at the golden retriever and the boy with the blue and white striped shirt, again, look at those lips. Those lips are a bit tight. This dog is giving us a good example of what a whale eye looks like. So if we look at that eye and we can see the white of that dog's eye, that's a whale eye, and that says, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. You can also see that this dog is pulling a bit away from those child's fingers. That face says, I'm a little bit concerned about your hands close to me. If we look at the picture of this miniature pinscher and the child in the maroon and white striped shirt, that miniature pinscher is giving us a good example of a furrowed brow. So that brow is not, it's not stress-free. You can at least start to see the lines between those brows. Those lips are a little bit tense. Those ears are very much oriented to that child, but they're not loosey-goosey, if you will. You can also see that that body posture is not right up next to that child. Oh my gosh, I'm super comfortable. It's a little bit leaning away. You can at least see a bit of that lean. And then when we look at the picture of the 2 girls with the golden retriever, this is a great example of a lip lick. So that is that flick of that tongue close to the nose that says, oh gosh, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. A little bit less of a whale eye, less tensing of those ears, but it's a great moment that was captured on a picture of that dog licking its lips and saying, I might not be comfortable. So again, let's stop and consider the context and that dog's response. Does this dog have any experience with children? Was there supervision from an adult? If we think about it from a medication management and alternative behavior standpoint, so if this dog is anxious and fearful, can we potentially improve its baseline with medication? Does this dog have a reason to be fearful of a child and their approach? Does this dog have a safe place that it can be away from children if it is concerned about children in the household? Can we better manage this interaction as owners, and does it know an alternative behavior? So this is, I have no idea who this family is. I just pulled this picture off of the internet, but I thought this was at least a good example of doing something a little bit differently as far as supervision with a dog. So this mom is in between her youngest child and that dog. She's got her full attention on that dog, and that dog is at least comfortable with this situation. He's got more of a she, they have more of a loose posture. We're not necessarily seeing some of those more concerning warning signs that we were seeing before. So let's look at some of those questions. So can this dog benefit from medication? Possibly, if they're generally anxious or anxious in other contexts. If their arousal level is so high during these interactions that they instantly fill that arousal bucket, we can certainly see that they could benefit. We can also think about this as is this a one-time thing? Children are coming over for a holiday, or is this going to be something that this dog has to manage through on a daily basis? That might change my mind as far as, do we recommend medications or supplements? We need to think about this dog's previous history. Does this dog have any experience with children before? Is there any history of an aversive technique or punishment in relation to children that dog is relying on? Does this dog have a safe place that it can be away from that child? Can certainly be using baby gates, crates, or another room. Sometimes these dogs definitely benefit from having time away from children so that they don't have to be on all the time, if you will. How can we better manage these interactions as owners? So we can certainly separate the dog from children until they're comfortable, and we definitely want to make sure we're teaching children appropriate ways to interact with dogs. And again, does this dog know an alternative behavior? Does it know, say, a go to mat or go to place cue, where we can say, okay, I get that you're a bit stressed about this situation. Why don't you go to your own special area where nobody's going to bother you? Do they also know to remove themselves from that situation? So very much if they can choose to go to a bedroom and remove themselves from that interaction, we can positively reinforce that by saying, you're removing yourself, nobody's going to bother you at this point in time. So what are the things that are a bit of our pitfalls, the things that are a bit more challenging? So if we are not managing that interaction from the beginning, so before that child arrives, that dog gets closer and closer to threshold and filling its arousal bucket. Again, think about that couch scenario. If they are concerned about children approaching, do they feel the need to protect themselves and their space even more? This is going to be a hard one, guys. Some dogs will not be comfortable with a child interaction, and however difficult that is, we need to be respectful of that. And so that's us working as owners to better manage those interactions and say, I get it. I get that you're uncomfortable. Let me move you out of that situation. You don't have to feel that way. This is one of my other soapboxes. So guys, adult supervision is necessary the entire time a child is present around an animal. I'm going to say it again. Supervision is necessary the entire time a child is present around an animal. The last thing that we want is to not be paying attention and have something that either endangers that child or endangers that animal. So if a child doesn't know the rules, doesn't know to follow the rules, if they're a bit unpredictable and are not able to respect that dog's body language cues, that dog might feel the need to resort to a higher level of aggression. So that's why we at least need to be monitoring that situation all of the time. So what can we do even better yet? Again, we can explore that medication option. If it's appropriate and not in a vacuum, we can certainly consider medications and supplements to help this dog through this more stressful time. If it's going to be something that is a situation where that dog might be uncomfortable and maybe that dog does not live with that child all of the time, we could consider a situational medication, maybe in addition to a daily medication. If that dog is going to be in contact with children more frequently and they're stressed about those interactions, we might consider a daily medication to help this dog through that stressful time. Again, we talked about consistency and predictability with all household members and guests. We want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. When we think about management from the start, again, that's separating the dog from children until they're comfortable. That's providing that adult supervision at all times. We definitely want children to understand a consent to pet test. This can be also very helpful for visitors and the guests that are in our home. So when I think about a consent to pet test, it's basically asking that dog, are you comfortable with this interaction? And so the way that I talk about doing that is you have your dog, you go ahead and pet it on its chest or on its side and give it 2 small pets, and then you pull your hands away. If that dog comes over to you, puts its head under your hand, asks for more of that interaction, that is a yes, I want that interaction, I am comfortable with it, please continue. If you do your 2 pets and that dog either does nothing or steps away or turns away or shows any of those lower level signs on that ladder of aggression, that is a no. That dog says, no, I don't feel comfortable. Please don't pet me anymore. And so that's definitely a way that we can have a clear yes and a no as far as interactions. The other thing that I get a lot of questions about is having children offer treats to dogs that are a bit uncomfortable. And I think this can be a bit of a challenge because we're coming at it from a good place. We want to use food to create that positive emotional response with dogs, but I find that these dogs can be a bit of a challenge if they are more interested in that food and that food overcomes their fear, their anxiety of the situation for a moment. But then what happens when that food is done? That dog is very, very close to the thing that they are afraid of, and now that super awesome thing is not present. and oh my gosh, how do I get myself out of that situation? So what I think about is not having children offer treats from their hands. They can certainly toss that treat behind that dog. I think of that as a no strings attached. It can also be one where we as the adults in the situation can be tossing treats. As long as there are treats in the vicinity of that scary stimulus, that child, we can certainly think of that as a way to provide those treats. Again, keeping everyone safe in that situation. We can provide a safe space behind a baby gate, in a crate, in another room for that dog to have time for itself. And then can we work to condition that positive emotional response to children? I did want to give you guys this image. This is from a website and a group called Family Paws. They are certainly very helpful for not just babies and toddlers, but for children as well, families working with dogs. And so they talk about 5 different types of supervision and go through it on a 4-star scale. So if we look at the 0 stars, this is no adult present. There's no adult in the room when the dog is around a baby, toddler, child, what have you. When we have this passive supervision, this is the adults in the same location, but they're distracted and not watching. Certainly can be something concerning for an inappropriate interaction. Then we have a reactive type of supervision. This is responding after the dog or the child is too close. So that adult is present, but they're a bit more reactive. And then we want to think about this 4 and 5, the 3-star and the 4-star types of supervision. So we've got proactive and active. We've got this parent that is actively planning and preparing a safe separation, and then we have full awake adult supervision. Again, this is a great website for folks that are starting to manage through these more challenging situations with dogs and families. I did want to show you guys this other image that is about dog bite prevention tips, and we're going to focus more on what we can do teaching our kids and what we can do as parents. So the 3 things we want to work to teach our kids is dogs don't necessarily like hugs and kisses. The last thing that we want is for that dog to have a face-to-face interaction with a child. Again, getting very, very close to that face on that eye level can be something that causes a bit of concern as far as, well, if that dog has a reaction, what do we do? We instead want to teach those kids to scratch the dog on their chest or on the side of the neck, again, with that adult supervision. I do like number 2. So this is what children can do when they're approached by a strange dog. It can also be what children can do when they're approached by their own family dog, if their dog is a bit over aroused, a bit overexcited. So we want kids to think about being a tree. So we want to stand still like a tree. Trees are very boring, and that's going to be something where that dog says, "You're boring, I'm going to go away." We can have them bring their hands like leaves in towards that tree trunk, and then we can have them look at their feet and think about roots growing. So all of these things make them not exciting, and it's going to be more likely that that dog says, "You're boring, I'm going to go away." We also want to teach kids that they should never be teasing a dog. We don't want to disturb a dog that's sleeping, eating, or protecting something. And then we think about the things that we can do as parents. So again, there's my soapbox. We want to make sure that we're supervising. We can't necessarily assume that your dog is going to be good with kids. We want to make sure that we are providing those appropriate interactions. And that last sentence is something that I think about all of the time. Even if your dog is great with kids and has never bitten, why would we take that chance? So that's something that we think about for sure. We also want to work to train that dog. We want to make sure that they know what is expected, where they know those alternate behaviors, and they can also move away from those stressful situations. We want to condition that positive emotional response so that they can enjoy the presence of children using those positive experiences. So this is where our next chat and question break is. I've been at least watching the chat a little bit as I've been talking, and so I think a lot of the questions were more general from the beginning, so we might end up circling back to those at the end. But one question that came up, at least through the medication part of things, was what about calming CBD pet tincture as a medication alternative? And I would say, Grace, that's a great question. I get asked about CBD oil all of the time. It's something that can be a bit of a challenge in the behavior world because we don't necessarily have a lot of data on it at the moment. So I have much more data telling me it can be helpful with dogs that are a bit uncomfortable, dogs that have a bit of arthritis. We have the studies that say it can be more helpful there. The other challenge I see with CBD is it can be a bit of a what is actually in our CBD oil and what isn't. So we can see that different companies, different producers have different things in it. And we're also starting to find that CBD can actually interact with some of the other psychotropic medications that we might be prescribing. So that can be a bit of a challenge saying, well, what's causing side effects, what isn't, what do we need to change, and what don't we? So pretty commonly I will think about, is CBD helping or not? If folks are already on it, we at least try to tease that out. And if we're finding that maybe it isn't as helpful as other alternatives, do we reach for something else? Someone else.
We're going to have a webinar with Dr. Leslie Sim just on CBD later in May.
Perfect. So that's a great thing that you guys can tune into that to talk about from that specific CBD perspective. Thanks, Deborah. The other thing that someone commented on, and I loved it, being a tree also works when you're trying to teach your own dogs not to jump in greetings. Certainly. What I think about is if I'm the most boring thing in the world, that dog is going to go away and say, well, you're not exciting. We reward that walking away. We say, yes, good job. You did not continue to press and have that interaction. So yes, certainly being a tree can be very helpful for those dogs that are a bit over exuberant with their greetings. And everyone that had questions further up, I'm going to get back to you. Let's go through some of these other examples so that if we do have to go back, we certainly can. So what I would say is I'll certainly circle back. Let's look at some of our other examples. So let's look at these fear-based reactions to unfamiliar people. We're also going to look at an unfamiliar dog example. So remember, these are going to be our strangers. These are going to be people that these dogs don't interact with. So again, we're thinking about it from this dog's perspective. My people are having their extended family over for dinner. Take a deep breath. You can handle a small group, but bigger groups are very scary. These people are new and unpredictable. Oh my goodness, there's this one guy who keeps reaching down to pet me. Doesn't he see how uncomfortable I am? Where are my people to tell him to stop? Okay, no one's here. I need to tell him to stop. I'm going to do it with a growl, or I'm going to bite him next time he reaches for me. He's just not listening to my signals. So if we look at this picture, this is a human hand that's reaching towards this German Shepherd type dog. That dog is screaming as loud as it possibly can. Please don't touch me. Please don't bring your hand towards me. I don't want it. Please just step away. That dog's ears are pinned so close to its neck, I can't even see them. Also, where is this dog's tail? It's very hard for me to figure out where it is. It's tucked so close to its body. And again, that cower just says, please don't come near me. When we think about that human response, so we think about what we might say in response to that dog's reaction, we might yell, why would you growl at my friend or my family member? We also might yell at our friend and family member, why are you bothering my dog? We can also remove the dog. This is getting out of hand. So let's stop. Did we consider the context and that dog's response? Did we attempt to manage that interaction before it happened? And has there been a difficult interaction in the past that they learned from? So if we think about how we can go about this from a medication management and alternate behavior standpoint, is that dog anxious and fearful, and can we improve its baseline with medication? We've talked about that a bit. Do they have a reason to be fearful of this person's approach, or is it people in general that it's concerned about their approach? Does it have a safe place that it can be away from these unfamiliar humans? So think back to what we did with children. Can we better manage this interaction as owners? And does it know an alternate behavior? So we can at least skip over the first three. We've talked about those a bit, but let's think about separating the dog until they are comfortable. So we don't necessarily need that dog to be right next to those scary people the second they come into that household. If we can put that dog behind a baby gate, if we can give it something to do, a Kong, a snuffle mat, something awesome to work through, we don't necessarily need that dog to be right next to those visitors. We can also work to instruct our visitors how to appropriately interact with our dog. Does that dog know an alternate behavior? Can it go to a mat or go to place? Can it remove itself from that stressful situation and say, nah, I'm not comfortable. I know those scary people aren't going to follow me. Let me go into that bedroom. And then do we, as the humans in that environment, work to say, I get that you're uncomfortable. Let's make sure that we give you that space. What are some pitfalls that we can potentially see? So if we're not managing these interactions from the beginning, so that's before guests arrive, that dog gets closer and closer to threshold and fills up that arousal bucket. If they are concerned about humans approaching, do they feel the need to protect themselves and their space even more? Again, if we think about what we talked about with children, if the visiting humans don't follow the rules, are unpredictable, and don't respect the body language cues, that dog might feel the need to resort to a higher level of aggression. So, what can we do even better yet? Can we potentially consider that medication option? Certainly. Can we improve the consistency and predictability of all household members and guests? We want to make sure that we're doing management from the start. So we're separating dogs from visitors until they're comfortable. Guests understand that consent to pet test. And again, guests are not offering treats from their hands. So we want to make sure that those guests, if they are tossing treats, they're tossing treats behind that dog. Again, no strings attached. Here, you know awesome things are coming from these people. And how do I make you more comfortable with this situation? We want guests to understand the rules about interacting, to decrease the number of approaches or reaches, but also we can decrease guest interaction in and of itself from the beginning by providing that safe space behind a baby gate, in a crate, in another room. And then we can work to condition that positive emotional response to people approaching. Some similar situations can be strangers on walks, strangers approaching and trying to pet on walks, strangers with dogs on walks, and even strangers approaching the door of the house or the yard. Think about that dog that might be more concerned and have a territorial component. I know our main thing was to talk about dogs' reactions to people, but we should certainly think about unfamiliar dogs as well, because it could involve a person component. So let's think about this from that dog's perspective. Okay, my people are reaching for that leash again. That means it's walk time. Ready? Be on your guard. There are dogs out there. They are not to be trusted. I've been charged in the past, and that could certainly happen again. I'm going to keep myself safe. I need to be more assertive and tell other dogs to back off. This means growling and lunging, because you want to know what? That worked in the past. So if we look at this picture, we've got two dogs that obviously approached each other on a leash. The terrier with the little jacket seems to be the more assertive dog of that group. He's leaning towards this little floofy dog. He has his ears up. He is leaning on the very end of his leash to try to have access to this other dog. The little floofy dog is a bit wary. She will think that she's a she. She's got a pink harness, is leaning back. She's trying to at least lean away from that other terrier, and her leash is a bit more loose. Let's think about what the human's reaction might be in this situation. It could be frustration. This is something that happens all of the time. They might also be embarrassed. Why does my dog do this? They could be a bit angry. So do we have a leash correction or a verbal correction? They might be a bit fearful. Do they tense up before that other dog gets close? So again, that question from before of, can my emotions potentially affect my dog's reaction? It's possible. Might they think about removing that dog? So this is getting out of hand. Let me get my dog out of this situation. So again, guys, let's stop. Did we consider the context and that dog's response? Did we attempt to manage the interaction before it happened? And has there been a difficult interaction in the past that they might have learned from? So let's think about this from a medication management and alternative behavior standpoint. Can we potentially add medication in to help these dogs with this reaction? Certainly, we can think about it. Does this dog have a reason to be fearful of another dog or their approach? Have they had a difficult interaction with other dogs in the past? Can we manage this interaction better as owners? Are we observing and managing their emotional response to the trigger? Does this dog know an alternative behavior? So the dog in this picture is giving us a great alternative behavior that we can certainly use on walks. So we could think about this as focused or even some offered eye contact. This dog is actively saying, my person is the most predictable and the most consistent thing in this environment. I'm going to look to you for that direction. So when we look at these different questions that we can review, we've talked about the first two already. Can we potentially better manage this interaction as owners? Can we think about a harness, a gentle leader, a vest, or a leash sleeve that asks people or other dogs, owners of those dogs, to give us a little bit of space? So we'll talk about all of those in the next upcoming slides. Are we observing and managing their emotional response to the trigger? This is all about body language. Are we watching that dog's response? And again, does that dog know an alternate behavior? Can we ask them for offered eye contact, a focus cue, or can we initiate an emergency U-turn? I'm going to get you out of that situation because I see that you are starting to get uncomfortable. If we think about some pitfalls, we're not managing these interactions from the beginning. Certainly we can fill up that arousal bucket. The challenge is going to be that some dogs don't read other dogs' body language well and can cause escalations in situations. We also have some humans that don't read body language well and might press those interactions. So think about those dogs that say, or those people that say they're great with dogs. Well, maybe not my dog. My dog might be a bit uncomfortable. We also have those humans that don't necessarily listen well to other humans when they're trying to advocate for their dog. All of these can cause that dog to escalate when they feel threatened. So what can we do even better yet? So we can explore that medication option. We can think about using it not in a vacuum and help that dog to improve its baseline. We can work through consistency and predictability with all household members regarding walk management. And we can manage from the start. So we can monitor that environment on walks, removing that dog before a trigger is encountered to decrease the chance of reaction. We can also avoid walks during high traffic times of the day. This is a little bit more challenging now that we're in quarantine to figure out what are higher times of the day, but we can also think about going to a church parking lot or a business parking lot where there are less triggers. We can work to increase that mental enrichment in the home or the yard to decrease the need for walks. And we can work to condition a positive emotional response to a dog's presence and approach. So if we think about more specifically, what can we do even better yet for walks? This can be for dog reactive dogs or people reactive dogs. We can think about using a body harness or a gentle leader. We can think about an in training or a do not pet vest or harness. We can use leash sleeves that say do not pet. What we can do more actively is going between parked cars when we see a trigger. We can run up a driveway, cross the street, or initiate that emergency U-turn to avoid triggers. We can work through muzzle training. I think about muzzles as a piece of equipment that provides us with that extra insurance. We make sure that we have that extra insurance so that that dog's mouth is not able to contact with any person or any other dog. We can work to avoid walks and provide a different outlet for physical and mental energy, and we can even think about decompression walks. These are walks that we take at a quiet time of day, in a forest, in a park, or even in our own backyard where that dog gets to be a dog. It gets to walk around and take its time sniffing all of the things that it wants to do and have that interaction there. Let's look at a couple of the different pieces of equipment that we can think about. So this is looking at purely just body harnesses. So the top two, the freedom harness and the balance harness, are really great because they incorporate a leash system that has two clips with one leash and one handle together. It gives you a bit more control over that dog's body from the get-go. So that front clip helps to control that left or right motion, and that back clip gives you a bit more control over that body in and of itself. I did want to show you guys this bottom picture, the harness lead. So this can be something that is helpful for dogs that are a bit more concerned about noises. It is one continuous harness that's made with the foundation of, say, a slip lead. There are no clips, there are no metal pieces that could create that noise component. So this can certainly be helpful if you have dogs that are a bit more challenged as far as noise components in that regard. This next slide is looking at other different pieces of equipment that we can use. So if we look at the two different types of head harnesses, so we've got gentle leader and the halty. The way that I think about these are, this gives you a bit more control over this dog's head to at least direct it in the direction that you want. If you think about it from a standpoint of a horse, that horse is using that bridle and that lead rope, and we're able to direct that horse. Dogs are not necessarily small horses, but we can think about them in the same way. What is nice is very much so you can use that gentle leader and have a muzzle on a dog at the same time. And you can also use that harness as a component as well. So it gives you a little bit more control in those more stressful situations. And the other images are what we can have as a do not pet vest or that leash sleeve. So this vest harness comes as a component altogether. There are also patches that are out there that we can use as far as putting those on a pre-existing harness. And then we've got our leash sleeves. Those can be a wide variety. So that can be stop, do not pet. That can be I'm a bit anxious or I need space. They're very much available on Amazon and Etsy. So you can certainly look for something that best fits your pet. This next slide is the different examples of muzzles that we can use. So again, using that muzzle as a piece of insurance, making sure that that dog's teeth are not able to come in contact with a human or another dog. The big thing that I think about with muzzles is I definitely like the basket component. I'm not a big fan of cloth muzzles, the leather muzzles. Those can be a bit of a challenge because those dogs are not necessarily able to pant in those muzzles. And we certainly want to make sure that they can pant and dissipate that heat if they need to. We also want to make sure that this dog can do everyday things like take treats and drink water with this muzzle in place. And I do like the aspect of the basket muzzle covering that front portion of those dogs' teeth, because certainly even if we have access to those front teeth, those incisors, those can certainly cause some damage if they do come in contact if we have, say, a cloth muzzle with that front end open. So if we look at the different types of muzzles that we have available to us, that black muzzle on that lab, that is a Baskerville muzzle. It has the ability to clip over the top and connect to the rest of the portion of the dog's muzzle, and it can also clip to that collar. So very much secure. That muzzle is not coming off of that dog's face. Again, there's more than enough room for that dog to take treats. It can definitely drink water. This is something that I think about for my dogs that might not necessarily have that more long snout. If I have a dog that has a bit of a longer snout, let's look at that German Shepherd slide. So this is an Italian muzzle. So it is certainly for our dogs with a bit of a longer snout. So you can see that increased length on that muzzle. So those are certainly two good options for our dogs. Again, we want to make sure that those are sized appropriately so that dog has more than enough room to go ahead and pant when we have that muzzle on. The more colorful muzzle that's on this adorable white boxery bulldog type of dog, this is actually a custom muzzle. So the company is Bumas, so it's B-U-M-A-S. And what this is we actually take specific measurements for that custom muzzle for that dog. And so that is one where we take those custom measurements. You get to pick the color. You can at least customize what those rivets look like. This can be something that is more for that dog that is going to be using that muzzle on a daily basis. If you want something a little bit more fancy than the black or the brown, it's certainly an option that we can think of. And not to leave out our smooshy faced Frenchies and Bulldog type dogs, we certainly have muzzles that are available for them as well. This is a muzzle that you can actually find right on Amazon. It is a more of a mesh type muzzle, but there is more room below the jaw for that dog to be able to open up its mouth and pant. You have that opening right in the front where you can go ahead and apply treats, and that dog is able to drink water from that muzzle as well. So various options for the different types of dog snoots that are available. And so as we start to wrap up, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot of management techniques on the part of the owner. You would be exactly right. It's our responsibility as dog owners to keep our dogs safe and the people and other dogs around us safe. So if we think about some of our take-home points, I want you guys to remember that any animal is capable of biting or showing aggression. Every dog is an individual and might react differently. Dogs might react differently to different situations. Supervision is essential to keeping everyone safe. Body language is important. We want to think about those signs of stress. So yawning, lip licking, panting, eyes wide, ears pinned back, and avoiding eye contact. We also want to think about rolling over on their back. Might not be an invitation to pet. We talked about that a little bit. Tail wagging might not mean that a dog is indeed friendly. So tail wagging can be a sign of stress, alertness, arousal, or happiness. So what can we do as owners of a reactive dog? Again, we can think about management from the start. Can we separate them from visitors and children? Can we actively prevent access to triggers? We want to reward the behaviors that we do want. We can use equipment to increase safety. We can work to modify that behavior. And then we can certainly talk to your veterinarian or your friendly veterinary behaviorist and see if medications or supplements can be something that is helpful for that dog to help manage their arousal level, to help manage their anxiety, their stress level, and improve that baseline. And so the last picture I'm going to leave you guys with, this is my own dog. So Sadie Marie, we got her as a rescue at about 6 months. So she definitely did not have that appropriate and adequate socialization as a puppy. She is certainly very fearful of people and dogs on walks and might react to those people and dogs. So what her dad and I did is we said, okay, we're not going to do walks. We're going to do an alternative for you. So she gets a bunch of mental enrichment inside the house. She does not have a regular bowl for her food. We use slow feeders and other Kongs to help her get that mental energy out. And then she has a yard that she goes ahead and spends a lot of her time in. So very much these reactive dogs are near and dear to my heart. And it's all about finding those best management strategies that can help you guys work through those. So I wanted to say thank you guys very much so for coming to this presentation, at least to attend it virtually, and thank you guys for at least helping as far as once those slides were lost and whatnot. So great job calling those things out. I did include the website for the clinic that I work at. So it's the Animal Behavior Wellness Center. So their website is there. We do at least offer some online classes. So if you guys are worried about puppy socialization in this more challenging time as far as, gosh, what do I do in this quarantine, these stay-at-home orders, we are offering that virtual puppy socialization. So certainly something to at least go ahead and check out as far as that goes. So what I would love to do is at least circle back and look at the chat and at least address some questions that way.
Before you do, and before people leave, first of all, I want to thank you. And I want to apologize to everybody. I understand that in addition to the problems we saw, there were a bunch of problems logging in and getting removed and all sorts of stuff. We should have this tape up. If you go to the video section of under webinars on our website, and you go down to where it says you can click for a list of recorded workshops and webinars. This should be up by tomorrow. So if you missed parts of it, you will be able to catch it. I can't guarantee that you won't still have the glitches showing, but at least you'll be able to see things that you may have missed. And the other thing is, I want to remind you once more, if you like this webinar, or in general, if you like what Your Dog's Friend does and you are able, we would appreciate any donations. You can do it on our homepage or on the registration page. And with any luck, maybe we'll be able to upgrade to GoToWebinar instead of GoToMeeting and have fewer problems next time. Okay, now go ahead with your questions. Thanks all for
thank you, Deborah, for at least, going through that. And yeah, definitely thanks for bearing with us with these, these challenges as far as the GoToMeeting goes. I'll actually tell you guys a small story. So I attended one where my little brother was getting an award, and there were some inappropriate words put in the chat for the majority of that. So at least we didn't have that to potentially contend with that way. So definitely something a little bit easier that we could work through there. So basically what I'm doing, guys, is I'm going back through that chat to see what are some questions that we might not necessarily have gotten to. And there are a ton in the chat, so we might not necessarily get to all of them, but what I can do is let me try to get through at least some of them as far as I'm able to that way. Let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Going through, at least finding our place where we were before. Let's see, this is a good one. So this is one that's basically talking about dogs sending mixed signals. So sometimes actually approaching people that they're afraid of. So approaching them, and then if they move to reach towards her or greet her, she will growl. So that's something that we can definitely see pretty commonly in these dogs. So I call those dogs the more conflicted dogs. They're very much the, I don't know if I want that interaction. I've come a little bit closer and now I'm definitely too close, or, oh my gosh, you are too close to me. What do I do in that situation? And so I think that's one where we can certainly work with that dog to at least help them not necessarily put themselves in that more stressful situation. And again, try to change that emotional response. So we at least want them to either be comfortable with that decision to go ahead and approach those people, or if they are not comfortable with people moving and reaching towards them, trying to greet them, that's where we say, oh, my dog's not really comfortable with that. Again, advocating for your dog and saying, how do we at least keep them and you as safe as possible? So again, using that positive reinforcement to try to change that emotional response if we are able to. Let's see. Another question was, let's see, it was, goodness gracious, let me go back up. Every time you guys comment and have a new question, I have to go and find my place again. So this one is a question about a dog barking at children and wearing any unfamiliar hats or clothing. So yeah, that's certainly something where we can work through that to create that positive emotional response. So if dogs are a bit more concerned about children, or say people in hats, carrying bags, carrying umbrellas, providing that positive something, whether that be a type of a cookie or a special food item, to make sure that we say, listen, every time you see that, nothing scary is happening, but awesome things are happening. So that's something where we can certainly work to change that emotional response there. Let's see, this question was, it's about a dog that is good with most dogs, but the question is can this reactivity simply be to overexcitement? If the other dog stares or becomes stiff, this dog launches into a barking frenzy. Any recommendations short of never allowing him to greet another dog? And I think that's one where very much so reading the context of that situation. So this might be the type of a dog that can only handle one interaction with one dog on a walk. So if we find that this dog is, say, filling up that arousal bucket, whether it be with positive or negative emotional responses, that can certainly be where we see this challenge. So it might be one where we say, let's read the context of that walk, and then indeed say, okay, you've hit your quota for things that you can potentially handle. We're not going to continue that interaction on a walk that way. So that's at least what I think about. But great question, certainly. Let's see. Let's see. So this question is, my dog licks his lips when I'm petting him. Doesn't seem to be the least aggressive and will give kisses. How do we distinguish that from the anxiety type of lip lick? And so what I would say is, this is going to be the great place to use that consent to pet test. So very much if I am petting my dog, let's look for that clear yes or clear no. So if that dog continues to say lick their lips, or maybe doesn't ask for that interaction to continue, we can certainly see that maybe that's I'm tolerating it, but I'm not super enjoying it. Sometimes the term that we use might be that kiss to dismiss. So again, read that context of that interaction, because very sometimes, at least with our own dog, she can very much be enjoying that interaction and then is like, nah, I'm done with it. Please stop petting me. So that's one where we at least need to read the room. Let's see. Another question we have is a dog that might not like a particular breed of another dog. And so this can certainly be something that we can see. I was going to say, for my dog, she certainly does not like German Shepherds or brown pit bull boxer type dogs. So we can certainly see that some dogs can be uncomfortable with interactions with certain other breeds or types of dog. And it can be something that is as simple as the breed. It can be a previous interaction with that breed. Sometimes it can be a certain interaction with a certain dog. So that's one where we at least need to be conscious of that. And if we need to keep our dog away from a certain breed of dog, we can at least think about that for sure, and at least advocate for them and try to keep that dog away from the certain breeds that they don't like. Again, think about those generalities and those more specifics as far as what dogs would like to interact with and might not like to interact with. Let's see. Do I view the instinctive chase or prey drive as an aggressive behavior, even if the dog never bites or growls, in fact might wiggle their butt and want to be petted? So that's a great question. That's very much in the context of that situation. So if we've got wiggly butt and wanting to be pet and asking for that pet in that consent to pet test, I think that's certainly an appropriate type of interaction. We have some dogs that do have more of that chase or prey drive than others. Think about that from a genetic standpoint. So I would say, as long as we are not seeing those higher levels on that ladder of aggression, we can certainly see that we're reading the context of that situation appropriately. Let's see. We've got another question about tail wagging. So let me go back to it. See. Okay, so my dog wags her tail all of the time. She wags and will let me do anything. I could put my hand in her mouth, get kisses, but when another person is near, she still wags. I don't trust that wagging is always a happy response, and that's a great way to read that situation. So again, we talked about that tail being a misnomer. So I would look more at the rest of that dog's body posture. So certainly keeping tail wagging in the context of that interaction. Let's see. This one was a question about a puppy that is 12 weeks old, reacts to all people and dogs that we see out on walks. He's really excited and wants to run up to everyone. Is this normal, and will he grow out of this? And so what I would at least say is, I like that there seems to be that excited reaction, as long as we're reading that correctly. And if we want that interaction with other people, I certainly think that's one where, can we at least advocate for a more toned down version of that reaction? Can we potentially ask for a sit before we are interacting with other people, so that it's not that full-blown interaction all of the time? I'm running, jumping, licking on that other person. So it's certainly something that we can work through a management strategy to at least go ahead and help to work through those maybe more over exuberant reactions. And that's certainly something we can do for our puppies, but also something that we can do for our older dogs as well. Yeah, this is a great question. So this question is, I understand giving food and treats in the presence of something triggering, but how do we make sure we are counter conditioning as opposed to rewarding a fearful reaction? And so the way that I think about this is, we are not able to reward or reinforce fear, since that is at least more of it's something that comes from at least deep inside their brain, deep inside that neurologic system there. The way that I always think about it is, I'm only trying to change that emotional response. I'm not rewarding that fearful response that you're having. Also, can we work to better manage that response from the beginning and at least work through slower introductions to that more fearful stimulus? But great question. I get that question all of the time. see. Reading through, some of them are at least little stories about their dog and some positive reactions that they've had, some positive responses here. Let's see, we've got a 4-year-old mini Aussie that's very reactive to dogs and humans, and it seems to be more of based on sudden movements. How do we prevent this? It sounds like he was adopted about a year ago, and they know that he was not adequately socialized prior. And that can certainly be a bit of a challenge. So if this dog's baseline is a little bit higher than, say, other dogs, might we then consider how do we improve that baseline? So that might be something where we think about, would a consult be appropriate and be important for this dog so that we can potentially better manage it? We can certainly work through that management and training standpoint, but it almost sounds like this little guy is a bit stressed and generally reactive to a lot of things. So that might be one where do we explore that consult, or do we even talk to our primary care vet about how they can best be managed in those stressful situations? What I would say is, at least in the interim, we want to reward those behaviors that we like and at least try to ignore or not reinforce those more challenging behaviors. Let's see. How do you get your dog's reaction to give them that high value treat and show them that it's not a scary situation, even for a super food motivated dog? So it sounds like this might be a challenge of, my dog is either having a reaction or about to have a reaction and is not interested in treats. And so what I would say is, this is going to be something where I think about, are we too close to that stimulus? Do we not have enough space in between? Is that stimulus too overboard and too sort of over threshold, and do we need to rethink that situation? So that might be one where we need to take a step back and rethink that management strategy and work from a further away standpoint. Let's see. This one is another question, as far as a dog is very obsessed or attached to a person as an owner and can potentially lead to them interacting in not so great of a fashion with, say, other people. So that can certainly be a bit of a challenge when that dog is, say, trying to either protect their space around them, protect themselves, and potentially even incorporates that owner into that space. And again, that can certainly be one where, is this dog very close to that threshold? Can we improve that baseline? And can we at least help to manage through those situations as far as teaching them a better way to interact with those people, depending upon where that interaction happens? If it's out on a walk, if it's in the household, can we use those management strategies as far as keeping that dog further away from visitors, keeping that dog further away from those triggers? And then can we at least work through that from a behavior modification and management standpoint as well? Let's see. What I will do is, there are a couple of questions as far as, can we go back to that ladder of aggression slide? So let me go ahead and do that so that you guys can see that. We'll put that back up in the background while we go through a couple other questions. Let me go back. There we go. Let me leave that back up in the background, and we'll go from there. Let me go back to where I was as far as my questions go. Let's see. So this one was at least a more specific question as far as a dog that was rescued. It sounds like this dog will potentially attack the partner in a home, and sometimes they get along with them, and then sounds like sometimes they don't. And so if this dog is on this person's lap, or if he's in bed with this person, that dog might be a bit more concerned about other people's approach. And so, yeah, I would say that that certainly sounds like that situation that we had in that example. So can we ask that dog to perform a different behavior? It also sounds like this can be more of that conflicted dog that says, I might be okay with some things, but I might not be okay with other things. also something that we can think about as far as, do we have interactions with that arousal bucket? Are there some days where that dog's arousal bucket is a bit full, a bit more full than other days, and might we see a reaction to some things that they might not have on those other days? So that's certainly something that, you know, can we at least work through that as far as how do we manage that arousal bucket. And I think that is certainly something where we can say, if we don't have this consistency of a reaction, might this be one where if this dog is potentially experiencing stressors and triggers on a daily basis, might they benefit from a little bit more help? Might they need a little bit more than just say, let's manage these interactions if they go over threshold and fill that arousal bucket more quickly than, say, another dog would? So that's certainly something that we can at least think of as far as how can we, you know, help you guys out through that situation. Let's see. This one is a question about a strong fear of anything or anyone if they're coming up behind them when they're out on a walk. So how do we mitigate this aside from dragging her up the street? And so that can be one where, do we use that slipping in between parked cars? Do we use that emergency U-turn? This is something that I can certainly see commonly as far as dogs walking up behind other dogs, joggers coming out of nowhere, and things like that. So that's one where in those situations, we as owners can be very cognizant of what is happening and gauge how far we are from a stimulus before we have a reaction, and trying to at least change that positive emotional response. This is something where we can certainly, in working with a trainer or another behavior professional, can we work through a more controlled situation where we see how far it is from where we have that reaction, and at least try to work through those reactions there. That might be at least something that is helpful, since that's more of a specific trigger. Let's see. We've got another question here. So this is about a Great Dane that was adopted. It sounds like there's been some challenges as far as reactions to people coming into the home on holidays, letting out a low growl when this person walked in the room. So good question. What do we do when this growl comes out? And it's very much a growled, and we thought he was growling at the turkey. She reached down to pet him and he bit her. Definitely, I can appreciate how that can be a traumatic situation for everyone. And so what I would say is, it sounds very much like that growl on that ladder of aggression was at least a pre-sign to, I'm uncomfortable, I might potentially have a reaction. And so we saw that reaction. What I would say is, if we let out that low growl when she walked into that room, that at least tells me I'm a bit uncomfortable. So I would say we want to advocate for that dog and say, let me remove you from the situation. You don't have to be somewhere that you are uncomfortable. And it might be a matter where we say, do we try to separate that dog from visitors until we have a better response and a more comfortable situation? So very much like that unfamiliar person example, it sounds like this child is not in the house all of the time. So we want to think about that person as an unfamiliar person to that dog. So very much so thinking about that. Let's see. So one question was, do we do virtual consults about specific issues? So at least in this time of staying at home, we have some ability to do virtual consults, but it is something that is followed up by an in-person physical consult. So obviously it's something that has to be close to that DMV area, but at least if you guys are not close to that DC metro area, you can certainly go on to the website for the College of Behavior. So it's DACVB. So that's the acronym that denotes a boarded behaviorist. You can go ahead and Google that, and there you can certainly find some behaviorists in your area. So if you're not close to us, that's another option for you. Let's see. Okay, one of the next questions is, When your dog shows signs of aggression, are there specific commands you can recommend us to give to use as an alternate behavior, like place or sit or any others? Those are certainly good things that we can think of. I would say whenever we're using a cue, we want to make sure that they are comfortable with that situation. So the last thing that I want is for a dog to say be reactive and then be put into a sit and almost feel like they have to be there and then have that internal conflict still. So certainly if we can ask for a place or a sit and they're comfortable, I'm fine with something like that. I love the idea of a focus or giving us that offered eye contact. So again, I'm thinking about, can I turn your face away from the thing that is scary, the thing that you're concerned about, and get you to more focus on me, that more consistent thing in the room? And then if we get that focused eye contact, can we then move ourselves out of that situation? So that's certainly another option as well. Yep, this is a question as far as not taking dogs on a walk. And it's very much the, I want so badly to take my dog on a walk, but we live on a pretty busy road and it's stressful for us. So again, in that situation, I think about what can I do to expend that mental energy in other ways. So I talked pretty briefly about it, but some really good options would be frozen Kongs, snuffle mats, other enrichment toys. There's a great Facebook group on sort of DIY canine enrichment, but that's what I think about. If your dog is a bit more reactive on walks, there's no rule that says your dog has to go on walks. I am not joking you when I say my dog does not go on walks. We expend her mental energy in other ways. We can also think about using training as a way to expend that mental energy as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a, here's a food toy to work through. Can we work through, say, 5-10 minutes, whatever your dog is comfortable on, working through some of those cues that they know so that we can expend that mental energy as well? So that's certainly a great question. Let's see. We talked about not reinforcing that reactivity, not being able to reinforce that fear. Again, it's a lot about timing as far as when that trigger is experienced. And that can certainly be something that can be helpful for a trainer or other behavior modification professional to help you guys through that. Let's see, what puzzle toys or slow feeders do I use? So I'm very much a fan of the frozen Kong. It takes a little bit longer for my girl to work through that. I use slow feeders as far as the bowls with the protrusions up from the bottom. Outward Hound is a good option as far as that goes. You can also do something that is as simple as saving all of your boxes and say the brown paper packing material and create adventure boxes. So basically think about it as a box within a box within a box with a bunch of packing material in it, and you can sprinkle some of that food, that kibble, in and around those boxes and basically let your dog work through that. Another option that you can potentially think of is taking, say, an old shirt or a blanket, tying knots in it and having pieces of kibble or food in that as well so that they can sort of work through getting those knots out and getting that reward as well. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of options depending on whether you are a crafty person who wants to DIY it or someone like me who I at least would rather have that thing that I can get shipped to me from Amazon. So certainly options there. Let's see. Apartment living. How do we desensitize to people in the hallway? So we've had many occasions where we are walking down the hallway and doors open and this dog immediately starts barking, and then of course that neighbor runs back inside. And I certainly think apartment living can be a bit of a challenge, very much so if you have to say walk down the hallway, get into the elevator, walk through that lobby. And so that's something where can you even work with and set up a time to work through those apartment doors opening? So I think of that more as a desensitization and counter conditioning. Again, always a good idea to get a professional involved to at least work through this. But if you've got friends in the hallway that can potentially help you work through that to get that timing down, that might be something that's helpful as well to at least work through those reactivity issues there. Other things that we can think about, which isn't always an option, but gosh, can we use a stair option to not have to use the hallway as much? I know that can always be a problem with apartment living as well. Let's see. Okay. This one was going back to off-leash dogs in the community. So lately I've done the emergency U-turn only to have off-leash dogs run into the street and chase after us. Gosh, that is certainly a challenge. We are doing our normal walk, but more people are hanging out on their front yards with their dogs due to the stay-at-home orders. And honestly, I would say this is the biggest challenge that I have as far as how do we help to best manage these leash walks. And sometimes that can certainly be using that emergency U-turn, using that focus cue, and sometimes it can even be a matter of, again, however awkward or challenging it is, can we talk to those owners and say, gosh, can you please get your dog because my dog might not be good with your dog. I don't know how I feel about your dog approaching, or trying to find those off time hours as much as we are able to. And again, can we increase that mental enrichment for the time being so that we can at least decrease those timing of walks? But it is certainly a big challenge as far as trying to manage other owners of other dogs off leash and what we can do for our dogs to keep them safe. Let's see, this one is, do you have any tips for helping dogs who are overly reactive to strange noises in the home? So it sounds like this is a rescue dog that often gets spooked and will jump from snoring in his sleep if we make any noises by moving around. And that's something that can be a bit of a challenge. So can we think about whether it is noises within the home that are a bit predictable? So can we think about desensitizing that dog to those more predictable noises? So sometimes we think about, is it a noise from a typical noise that we can at least recreating at a small enough volume that does not create a reaction, and rewarding that lack of reaction with a cookie or something delicious, and then slowly increasing that noise throughout that process. If it is a bit more of a unpredictable noise or a unpredictable startle response, that can certainly be a bit of a challenge, because then we're more in that reactive mode of, my dog had a reaction, how do I go about and at least change that response? And so sometimes it can at least be rewarding that calmer behavior, having some of those treats on hand as far as, gosh, can we preempt that reaction? It also depends on if this is a dog that potentially, does it have reactions to other things? Is this more of a dog that is a bit more generally anxious? Are they closer to that threshold in general where they're more likely to potentially have a reaction? So that might be one where, do we evaluate all of these other things and say, well, gosh, could this dog benefit from, say, a medication or a supplement if they are indeed very close to that threshold? Again, a bit more of a specific situation, so that can potentially be a bit of a challenge to tease out there. Gosh, and I would say it looks like that at least I got to the end of my chat as far as questions and things like that, as far as the questions on the chat there. And like Deborah said, we'll go ahead and post this, and you guys are definitely welcome to always contact our behavior clinic if you have more specific questions that way. Want to go ahead and schedule an appointment, look into those puppy socialization classes there. So that's certainly something to consider in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. Rupsky.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And everybody, I'll be sending out some more information, so look for it. Bye-bye.